Three, two, one. Blast Off by Maureen Blaney Flutner. Missiles and rockets. To defeat its enemies in World War II, the United States and its allies fought on the same side as the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's leaders believed in communism. Under communism, the government owns all the businesses and all the land. Communism was very different from what America believed. Americans believed in many personal freedoms. World War II saw the use of many powerful weapons. When the war ended in Europe, the United States and the Soviet Union wanted to learn about some German weapons. One German weapon was called the V1, or buzz bomb, because it made a buzzing sound when it flew. Blast off! What is the difference between a rocket and a missile? A rocket is an engine that moves by burning fuel. The burning fuel makes gases that shoot out the back of the engine. When the gases shoot out, they push the rocket or engine forward. A missile is a rocket that carries a weapon. A ballistic missile is one that uses an engine to fly very high into the sky. After it reaches the sky and flies along a flight path, the engine turns off. The missile falls because of gravity until it hits its target. Another weapon was called a V2 missile. It had an engine that carried it up into the sky, and then it let it fall by the force of gravity to its target. It could send a large bomb more than 150 miles in only 5 minutes. Opposing views. When World War II ended, the United States wanted to help its allies and even its former enemies. The United States wanted this country to become strong and free. The Soviet Union did not want Germany and other countries to be strong because it worried that strong countries might attack it. The Soviet Union forced the countries it controlled at the end of the war to accept communism. The persons in those countries were no longer free. The United States and the Soviet Union had fought together to win the war. Now they were enemies and did not trust each other. The Cold War had started. It was a time of propaganda. The Soviet Union told people that communism was powerful. The Soviet Union held big parades to show off its tanks, missiles, and weapons. The United States told people that freedom was good and important. The United States used radio programs to tell people in communist countries that the American ideologies worked. Because the two countries did not trust each other, both sides wanted to be ready in case the other attacked. In the United States, scientists test and build missiles and rockets such as the Viking. The Soviet Union scientists built one missile called the R-5. Each side was busy making weapons or arms. It had become a race. Each side wanted to have more powerful weapons than the other side. It was an arms race. The Cold War was dividing the world. To help communism spread, the Soviet Union helped other communist governments. As a result, the United States helped countries that were not communist. The Cold War led to hero fighting. Wars were fought in Korea and Vietnam to stop the spread of communism. The space race. In 1952, scientists asked countries to make satellites. Satellites are objects that orbit or circle Earth. The scientists wanted to use the satellites to make a map of Earth. In 1957, the Soviets surprised the world by building a missile called an R-7. The R-7 was the first ballistic missile that could go a very long distance. It could even go between continents. It was called an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. R-7 was powerful enough to send a nuclear bomb all the way the United States or carry a spacecraft into orbit. A few months later, the Soviet Union sent the world's first satellite into space. Sputnik 1 was only the size of a basketball, but it was much bigger than the small satellite the United States had planned to launch. The space race had begun. Less than a month later, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 2. The spacecraft carried a passenger, a dog named Laika. The United States wanted to launch a satellite into space. It started a second satellite program called Explorer. On January 31st, 1958, the United States successfully launched its first satellite. It was called the Explorer 1. The United States wanted to do more in space. It started the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. NASA would lead America's way in exploring space. At the same time, both the Soviet Union and the United States were getting better at building missiles. Missiles now could carry many weapons, and they were more accurate. Dog in space. Laika, a small Russian dog, became the world's first space traveler. She was on Sputnik 2, so Soviet scientists could find out if a living creature could be sent into orbit. Laika became famous. Her picture was on postage stamps in different countries. Songs were written about her. 1959, the Soviet Union again scored a first by sending a spacecraft around the moon. In 1961, the Soviet Union sent the first person into space. The Soviets called their space travelers cosmonauts. A cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin circled Earth and came back safely. A month later, Alan Shepard became the first American to fly into space. Americans call their space travelers astronauts. Several months later, astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth. President John F. Kennedy told the world that the space race would end with the landing of a man on the moon. The space race was now a race to the moon. The United States was busy. NASA's Project Mercury program studied whether people could live in space. The Project Gemini program showed how two astronauts could and work on a spacecraft. The Project Apollo program studied how to land Americans on the moon and bring them safely back to Earth. Doing the moonwalk. On July 20, 1969, astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped off the landing craft and onto the moon. He said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Astronaut Edwin Buzz Aldrin followed him onto the moon's surface. The two astronauts walked around and collected rocks to study. The United States had won the space race. They had put man on the moon before the Soviet Union. The race to the moon was over, but the Soviets still worked on their other space projects. In 1971, they sent the world's first space station, called Salyut, into orbit. Later, they replaced Salyut with another space station called Mir. The United States worked on their other projects as well. NASA built a new vehicle called the Space Shuttle. It also launched a space station called Skylab. Skylab showed Americans that people could live and work in space for months at a time. The Cold War ended in the early 1990s when the Soviet Union fell apart. Russia, the biggest country that had been a part of the Soviet Union, now started working with the United States on space projects. Cool tools from the space race. During the space race, scientists had to think up new ways to do things. The things they learned and now help people in many ways. Here are just a few things we have because of space projects. Smoke detector. Equipment used to detect poisonous gases in Skylab now lets people know if there are fires in buildings and homes. Firefighter suit. Safer firefighter suits are made from the same fabric used for astronauts' space suits. Computer joystick. This stick was created by scientists who tried to figure out how to control robots that explore the moon's surface. Ear thermometer. Ear thermometers use the same technology scientists use as they try to detect new stars. Many good things have come from the space age. More may. Today, the United States and other countries are working together on the biggest science project of all, the International Space Station. On the International Space Station, scientists can study Earth to see how it is changing. They can look for new and better ways of doing things. The United States, through NASA, continue to explore space. The United States even plans to send astronauts back to the moon someday. It also plans to send humans to Mars and beyond. Lord's Year. Arms race, a race to build more and better weapons than the enemy has. Communism, a political and economic system in which the government owns all businesses and land. Propaganda, a systematic effort to spread opinions or beliefs. Satellite, an object that is sent into space and orbits Earth. Space race, a race between the United States and the Soviet Union to explore outer space during the Cold War.